Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. We're going to get started with our meeting. This is government operations session. We do have 3 items. The first one is supplemental appropriation to the FY19 capital budget and amendment to the FY19 24 CIP, and this is Department of General Services. It's $1,990,000 for council office building garage renovation, and the source are GO bonds. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Price. I see we have Mr. Sant here as well to give us a overview of why we need to consider this appropriation.
Here we go. Good morning. Thank you. The supplemental appropriation is needed throughout the course of the renovation work that began last spring. They have uncovered a number of additional deterioration in the concrete, and then the stairs in the garage as well. Those were not immediately planned to be renovated. Those are actually going to happen if it was to happen later on, but there have been a lot of structural issues that have gone on. One of the garages is actually, the stairwells is actually closed, so the additional funds that have been requested would address those additional issues, and these are these are life safety structural issues that have to be addressed. The dollar amounts that were added, $500,000 of this supplemental appropriation will go towards repairing the stairwells, and then the remainder will go towards addressing the structural steel and concrete issues in the garage that have been recently uncovered.
So I'm just curious as to what was the process to evaluate and then come up with the scope of the project that led to, of course, the amount of money that we budgeted, and in terms of the structural issues in the garage, were those not identified, originally? And also, how did this stairway, how did that come about? Was that, if that was not part of the scope, had that been evaluated also, or?
Sure. Good morning, Greg Austin, Department of General Services. You may recall that when we put in the request for the original project, we had done an analysis of the parking garage with the use of our consultants. They categorized repairs into three categories or 3 phases. Imminent repairs that were needed to protect life and safety, things that needed to be addressed in the very near term, and then things are a phase 3 which could be done at a later date and didn't have any time. They needed to be done eventually, but weren't urgent. And so we were appropriated for both phases 1 and 2 to correct those. As Linda mentioned, the split on this request is about $1.5 million for the concrete repairs and about $500,000 for the stairs. The stairs were part of that later on phase that we weren't anticipating doing this early. However, in consultation with the City of Rockville inspection staff, as well as our contractor, and with the closure of the one stair tower that is closed currently, these got pushed into that second category where they needed to be addressed now, because we couldn't meet code putting several stair towers out of service in order to get folks out of the garage. So that's the $500,000 for the stair towers, and that'll take care of all 5. The $1.5 million for this is the steel that is buried within the concrete. So within the concrete frame, once they started getting into the work and chipping away at things, noted that the structural steel within the concrete from many decades ago has started to deteriorate in certain locations. And that obviously has to be remedied. We don't have any ability to push that any further. It's a code issue. We need to get it corrected now. And so that's the lion's share of this request. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. I mean, I just think it's important, especially for the public, to understand that at least with the stairways, it was identified on a much longer term timeline, but given what was discovered, it is important to go ahead and do that. But then also, obviously, it's important for us to be able to explain how it is that these projects are conceived and how it is that they're negotiated and what are some of the contingency, because in many of them we do have reserves, because sometimes there are issues like these that come up. In this case, obviously, we have to remedy that, but in full transparency, it's important to understand how it is that these particular projects are managed.
Certainly, and also just in terms of schedule and timeline, because this does impact the public who are arriving for public hearings and as well as doing business in the Rockville core, we are scheduled to be complete by the end of the calendar year. We'll have the stairwell opened back up this summer, and then we'll continue to rotate around. And then there are some parking arrangements that were asked to be modified for council staff as well as council members, and so that'll be done at the same time. So we're going to wrap everything up this calendar year and hopefully be out of your hair before the new year starts.
So there are going to be additional times when council members and council staff have to park somewhere else?
No. This is a staff request to actually move some of what was originally planned to make it more convenient for council staff. So we're going to accommodate that request. It's not done yet, but we plan to do that in conjunction with this summer's completion of the stair tower.
Okay, great. Any questions from my colleague, Councilor Katz?
No, I appreciate the work that's being done. I mean, it's awfully, you can tell there's a lot of work being done in there. It's noisy and whatnot, and many times dusty, but that's part of what we do. But anybody that's ever renovated an old building, which is what we have, when you start chipping away, you realize that you have more problems than you anticipated. So these are necessary things that we need to spend money on.
All right, so without objection, we will recommend this to the full council. Thank you so much. Okay. So item number 2, this is our time of the year when we do a preliminary review of the cable television and communications plan. Sorry, did I skip?
No, you're fine.
Am I switching?
You got a question to flip.
Oh, I'm switching.
Has to go to TV.
Okay, that's right. Sorry, my binder. I just followed the order in my binder. Okay, so we are going to switch to item number 3, which is a briefing, a work session on implementing the charter amendment that's related to the non-merit employees in council member offices. And as we all recall, on November 6th, the voters approved a charter amendment that authorizes but does not require the council to exclude one or more aides for each council member from the county merit system. And the relevant portion of the charter for one with this new amendment underlined and the old language bracketed is here, so we can see how this basically provides the flexibility to council members. Today, we just want to have an overall conversation about some of the issues that need to be addressed in order for us to move forward with this enabling opportunity, enabling legislation. How would we craft that? And what would be some of the things to consider. So with that, Mr. Drummer, and also we have here Marlene Michelson that can walk us through some of the thoughts, preliminary thoughts and observations that you've made so far.
Okay, good morning. As you mentioned, the charter amendment is enabling but not mandatory. As I'm sure you know, the current council member staffs, each council member has a non-merit confidential aide or chief of staff, and the other employees are what we call term merit employees, which have all the rights of a merit employee but are hired for a specific term. In this case, I believe it's 1 year generally, and they all end in December each year and then can be renewed. The basic difference between a merit employee and a non-merit employee is really 3 things. It's hiring, the method of hiring, the method of terminating, and potentially the benefits that you earn while you're here. So that's what we're talking about. So if so the first obvious issue is, does the council want to implement the charter amendment? That's of course optional. And the second one, if so, assuming that the council does want to do it, when should it be done? And at this point, the soonest it would be logical to do it would be to do it at the end of the term merit positions in December of this year. And then the next question is, well, so how do we do it? And there's three options that I can see at the moment. Currently, all non-merit positions are somewhere as designated in county law. And that's the first way to do it, is to enact legislation to designate these positions as non-merit. Currently, although all the non-merit positions are designated in county law, there's not a complete description of job description or benefits or any of the other terms and conditions of employment that's left to other vehicles. So if the council was the first option to enact a legislation designating these positions, the council could then turn around and adopt a resolution that would flesh out the positions itself. The second option would be the council could probably just simply adopt one resolution that covers everything, including designating these positions as non-merit, just implementing the charter by resolution. And the third one would be to enact legislation that's comprehensive and includes terms and conditions of employment. The resolutions are easier to revise over time. They don't require the same kind of standard public hearings and stuff, so you give yourself a little more flexibility if you put the terms and conditions by resolution and enact the law designating them, just designating the positions as merit, non-merit. That's what's been done in the past. So those are the three basic ways it could be done. The next question is, and this is a policy question. Should the council member legislative aides all be non-merit, or should it be up to each council member? Should they have the option of creating a hybrid staff of merit and non-merit employees, which is what you have now? And the advantage of creating all non-merit, if you're going to go that way, is it's much more equal between positions in different offices, and you don't have issues of people doing the same work being treated differently, which can run you into many problems with other laws. But you could do it that way. So that's really a policy decision. It's also, I think, going to be administratively easier to have all the employees the same. There's obviously some administration to all this, and then there's also creating positions. You'd have to create two positions. Right now, each council member's staff has really two positions. There's a legislative senior aide, 1, 2, and 3. There's a legislative senior aide, 1, 2, and 3, and some offices have hired people at a lower level at a, what's the name? It's I always forget the name, Public Administration Associate, PAA. The PAA position exists throughout the county, so you can't really use that as a non-merit position without going into the executive branch where these people are. But the legislative senior aide only exists in the legislative branch. So if you were to create a non-merit legislative senior aide position, 1, 2, and 3, that could be done, and that wouldn't affect the executive branch, and would just affect the only place those people exist, I believe, are in the individual council members' offices. So that would be an appropriate type position. If you're going to go have some merit and some non-merit, you probably need to create a new type of position for one or the other. Let me see. So what else do we have? We talked about the positions. Oh, and then if for non-merit employees, obviously for merit employees and for the term merit employees, the hiring process is very standard and regimented. Regimented may not be a great word, but it is. You have to advertise it. You have to put out, open competition. Human Resources evaluates the applications for qualified or well qualified. If you have preferred criteria, they'll give you the top people, and then they send you a list, and you have to interview those people before you can look at anybody else on the list. And if it's a non-merit employee, you can kind of do it any way you want. You could do it exactly the same way, or you could simply hire the first person that calls you up and says, "I'd like a job," I'm not recommending that, but but that's a way to do it. So if the council wanted to create, they could create a standard hiring process that's somewhat less onerous than the merit system that everybody would go through. Would make it probably a little easier for administrative. But and the question is, how much help does each council member want from Human Resources, like in advertising positions, and how much help do you want from central staff, to help you hire people, to find people, obviously not to make decisions on who to hire, but just to get you people and advertise it and arrange interviews and whatnot. So that's something that the council could do, or they could just leave it up to each council member. Do it any way you want. If you want help, we're here to help you. If you don't want help, just go get them.
And I think just adding there, the important thing from a resource perspective is to make sure we understand what you would like, so we have the resources to serve you. I'm presuming that we would, to the extent you want to advertise, we'd still use the county to advertise. But because we've heard so many comments about the selection process being cumbersome, we probably would want to do an alternative selection process. And the question would be, do you want it to be in your offices, or would you like central staff to do sort of the first, culling, particularly if you end up with 100 applicants for a job? So we need to understand what your preferences are before we are ready to implement.
Well, the purpose of this initial session, obviously, it's clear that council members, I don't know if all, I include myself, have been a bit frustrated with the process of, hiring our staff. I think term limits also adds an interesting, element to this, because the bottom line is that it is clear that when you hire staff pretty much knows that you might have 12 years, you might have 8, you might have 4. There is a time certain, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that adds another element to the need to find some flexibility for council members to put together the team, and it's not a huge team, right? It's very small offices, 4 to 5 people, but to bring to that office the capacity that is needed, and I think especially with district members, that also has the capacity to deal with specific issues in the district, knows their district, et cetera. And that process, that's what led us here, has not, in my opinion, been a very effective process. Mm-hmm. So I always, like to work a little backwards. We're here because council members have identified the need for more flexibility and to be able to hire, the capacities needed. I'll give you another example. There are areas of this county, Gaithersburg is the most diverse city in the nation, who need, who will need certain language and cultural proficiency in terms of staff, right? Many times you have people that do apply for these positions and they don't get sent over as most qualified, because somehow our HR system, for some reason, has not, adapted to understanding what are some of those qualifications needed in our staff and the things that we require and that our constituents expect us to deliver. And so figuring out, and I think that's the work for staff right now, is, understanding what are the challenges the council members faced, then how it is that what would be the options we should consider to provide that flexibility while understanding that there needs to be a process. And, I mean, I don't feel, comfortable providing any particular feedback on these questions because I think all council members need to be a part of this conversation. Mm-hmm. But in general, I think that is the charge. I mean, the charge is, if we didn't have these issues, we wouldn't be here. But all of us have found, have been through very difficult and frustrating processes to hire our tiny little staff complement while trying to respond to, a very sophisticated constituency that expects a lot from us. Mm-hmm. And I think it's all about that sense of our service to our taxpayers. I mean, we rely so heavily on our very small complement of staff. So to the extent that some of these questions can be, I think, maybe, thought through a little more with that lens, I think that would be helpful. And then we may need to figure out a mechanism to get feedback from all of our colleagues mm-hmm. to then come up with these definite, answers. I mean, should it be up to every council member? Should it be a standard thing? Do we need to think about another classification? So anyway, I think it's just adapting who we are in 2019 versus using, structures that were put in place such a long time ago that no longer serve us. Councilmember Katz, Vice President Katz.
Thank you. I agree with much of what you just said. I think flexibility is the key. I think that we do need to, and as you outlined in part of the packet, I believe that we need to try to keep everyone who's on each individual staff to be treated the same way. I mean, to have a mix and match for merit and non-merit, I think first off would be an administrative nightmare for those who are trying to send paychecks. But so I think that we need flexibility as long as we can do it on a basis that people are all treated, fairly. I think all of us have experienced some frustration. I mean, when I first got here and I needed someone, or our office needed someone to staff a couple committees, and so another council member also needed a couple people to staff committees, but they were different committees, but the advertisement all went out as mm-hmm. that we need somebody, and so therefore somebody didn't know that what you were looking for. Some people candidly might want to work for my office and some people might not, so mm-hmm. we should put on the advertisement whose office you're looking for, who's looking for assistance. And to the council president's point, when you have 4 people and you lose one person, you lost a fourth of your workforce. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty significant, mm-hmm. And you need to get people back as quickly as possible. You certainly want people qualified. You want someone qualified that you know that you can work with, et cetera. But those things are important. So I think we should send out a survey, or whatever the right term would be, to all of our colleagues, and then move on this as quickly as we can. I think the timeline for December 2019 makes a lot of sense. It would be when the contracts are up, or or would be renewed, or whatever the right way to say that. And I think that would allow us to move on. To the council president's point, I mean, if you're term limited, I mean, you need to be move on this as quickly as we can. So that's where I think we're in sync on all that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think this is a very good preliminary information for us to consider. So why don't we, if you can take this feedback into consideration, and let's develop then a mechanism to get the feedback from other council members. I was going to offer perhaps a whole council session on it, but I think that it's still at very preliminary stages, so it may not be as productive. So perhaps we first get everybody's feedback, and then we can consider whether we take it into, the whole council, so that everybody can, have their input, and we can make sure that this reflects the will of the council. We can talk about that. I mean,
and it sounds to me, from what you're describing, and I think this would be very useful, that for each of these issues, we would present a few options.
Yeah.
And then try and figure out which option is the one that most council members would be interested in pursuing.
Right. And furthermore, I mean, I respect the fact that there are certain structures in HR, but I would also like to explore if there seem to be particular ways that they're doing things right now, but we may want to be more flexible. What would that take? And, any particular action on our part to do that. I just don't want to preclude ourselves from, pursuing a goal just because there are certain structures that are in place, and therefore we need to adapt to that. I think that we're on the right track with this. So why don't we do that, and maybe February. Maybe we can perhaps by April, have the feedback from our colleagues so that we can begin to talk about how we would proceed with something more concrete. Because if it is legislation, then we'd have to make sure that we adopt that in the fall, right? If we wanted to
That's our target would be to have the legislation adopted before December, but also to the extent that you want us to create alternative systems, that's going to take a lot of effort too, and we want to make sure that would be ready in time for when council members would want to start hiring their first non-merit. So, and just as a great example, HR requires an annual evaluation of employees, and a lot of people do not like that system and the performance plans. If we were to create our own evaluation system, we would need some time to figure out how to do that. So,
Okay, great.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Transportation demand management.
Demands your presence. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate also everybody that's here for item number 2. I appreciate your patience. We're going to get right into this preliminary review of the Cable Television and Communications Plan. All right. So, Dr. Torregas, you can invite the appropriate people to the table so that we can begin this conversation.
Thank you. The people are in fact the ones that are listed on the expected to attend roster.
Yeah.
My name is Costas Torregas. I'm your IT advisor, and I will walk you through this packet. The most important thing to recognize is that there are no decisions to be made today. This is a preliminary cable plan that the executive has sent over on January the 15th, 2019. The intent of this discussion is to understand the directions that the executives plan to take with the cable plan. It's a major plan. It involves some $30 million, so it's wise to take a look at before the executive cements down the decisions that he's going to be making, and also gives you a chance to interact with the PEG governance board, with our new broadband officer, and the Office of Management Budget, so that the plan that does come over on March 15th is in fact reflective of the needs of the committee and the full council. My suggestion is to first of all recognize the recommendations that are on page 2. The first one I've mentioned already. The second one is that there are no expenditure numbers this year. Usually expenditure numbers do come over, but this year they're still working on some changes that have to be made. So no expenditure numbers are, or the expenditure numbers in the plan should not be interpreted as planned expenditures. Jenny, do I have this right? How would you describe the expenditure part of the plan?
Sure. This is Jennifer Nardine with Office of Management and Budget. Due to the deadline, which is January 15th, it's not, it doesn't align with when we start to look at our second quarterly numbers for the current year. So the revenues haven't come in for us to know what those are yet. The expenditure data is being analyzed, and that's what's transmitted to you as part of the second quarterly analysis. So none of those numbers are available at the time that we transmit this information to you. So what we were able to do this year is provide first quarter revenues, update the plan, but the remaining information that you seek wasn't available simply due to the time frame. So we are recommending that we revisit the time of these discussions moving forward, simply to provide you with more useful information.
Yeah, Councilmember Katz.
Are the revenues even throughout the year? Is there certain times of the year that we get more revenue or less revenue? How does that work with you?
The franchise fees are quarterly. I can let the department speak more to those.
Okay.
Joe Webster with Department of Technology Services, Office of Broadband Programs. The cable franchise fee revenues are fairly stable throughout the year. There's not a lot of seasonality. And part of the change this year is the Office of Department of Finance has developed a forecasting model for us, looking at the last 17 years of data and forecasting going forward, which is part of the discussion we may want to have today about the forecast for a decline in franchise fee and associated revenue due to cord cutting, cord shaving, cord nevers.
The third area that I would invite the committee to observe and to go a little bit deeper is the revenues themselves. If you turn over to page 4 of my memo, you'll see that there are 4 areas that I chose to ask the executive branch in terms of the revenues. They're not prepared, and I'd like to amend what Jenny said. It's not only the expenditures for 2019. My concern was that there are no expenditure patterns visible for 2020, which is the anticipated 2020, and we'll get into that perhaps a little bit later. But for the revenues, there are 4 areas that I wanted the committee to be aware of. On page 4, question number 1 is, there was a reduction in the revenues of 2018, the year that closed on June 30th, 2018. There was an adjustment of almost $1 million, $1.7 million. And I wondered why there was such a major adjustment to the revenues that are booked. And if you look at the answer from the Office of Cable, Office of Broadband and OMB, the major rationale was that there was a reduction in revenues of about 1.1 million. There was a reduction in fund balance designation of 1.1 million. And then, gratefully, there was some reduction in expenditures of about $500,000. So that brought the change to $1.7 million. It's a significant number because anytime you take out $1.7 million from 2018, that means you start 2019 with $1.7 million less. There's nothing to be said about anticipated revenues. We just did not forecast well enough. But the one that caused some head scratching for me at least was the change in fund balance designation for 1.1 million. In other words, 1.1 million of the cable fund balance was simply taken away and put in a different fund, not the cable fund. I wonder if between Joe and Jenny you might want to address that $1.1 million transfer.
Our budgets are always based off of the certified annual financial reports that our Department of Finance puts together. So as soon as we receive...
You're going to need to speak up, please.
Sure. The certified annual financial reports that Department of Finance puts together is what we start our next year's budget off of. So the ending fund balance is where we start. We receive those in the fall once the Department of Finance has put that all together. So when we were made aware of our ending fund balance in FY18 in the fall, is when this number became apparent to us. So it's a $1.1 million change in how the fund balance is designated between restricted funds and unrestricted funds. So the restricted funds are what funds the capital projects that use these revenues, that's Ultra Montgomery and FiberNet. They remain in the cable fund as a restricted amount until they're actually spent in the CIP. So we can't use those monies for our operating budget expenditures. And so when Finance completed their reconciliation of all their numbers at the end of the fiscal year, they realized that 1.1 million had previously been categorized as unrestricted, that should have been restricted. And so they made that adjustment, and that is what's hitting our available money in FY19.
And how is that money being spent, the restricted funds?
Both in the FiberNet projects and the Ultra Montgomery projects.
So when that was then budgeted previously, was there any conversation about the fact that there was $1.1 million sort of missing from that particular area that was going to be utilized?
Not that I'm aware of. So Finance can probably speak a little bit in more detail about how these actual calculations are come to, but I believe it was just at the end of the year they realized that it was miscategorized and they corrected that categorization.
I can probably suggest that the two projects that Jenny mentioned, one is FiberNet and the other one is Ultra Montgomery. They are CIP projects, so you'd expect 1.1 million additional revenues to be
Right.
put in those two projects. This year, the executive chose not to send over any changes to the CIP designations for FiberNet and for Ultra Montgomery. As a consequence, there's nothing for us to see how he chooses to spend a $1.1 million more. Make no mistake about it, there's 1.1 million more available for designated projects. It's just that it's no longer undesignated in the cable fund, but it's somewhere, and some project is going to be increased by 1.1
But that's
million.
what I was trying to clarify, because
guess-
what I heard you say was that it was misclassified. And so if it was misclassified, were there already, was there a budget allocation for, FiberNet, et cetera, that included the 1.1? And then because it was on the, unrestricted area, and you discovered that, then you went ahead and made that change. But to your point, is it just showing that this is, before we thought that we had that additional 1.1 already budgeted into the CIP area? Is that what you're saying? There was a mistake made, if you will?
Yeah, the CIP appropriation won't change. The cumulative appropriation is what it is. This isn't going to adjust it up or down. This is simply the financial statements are changing what part of the fund is designated for CIP versus the operating budget. So your understanding is correct.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, got it. Thank you. The third question, which is on page 5, there was a change to the general fund transfer. The approved 2019 cable plan shows a transfer of $6 million. The recommended that shows as what the county executive plans to do is way down to 1.9 million. So there's a reduction of 4.1 million. I just want you to know that as of now, because of many changes, including revenue changes, the executive expects to take down much less of the cable fund to the general fund than he had requested and you had approved during the budget season of 2019 fiscal plan. So I don't know if you want to emphasize anything, but I wanted to make sure that you understood that the transfer to the general fund currently is showing to be significantly reduced because of changes to the revenue side of the cable plan. Okay, and then the last question was on the cable fund total resource change. There was a reduction of 1.6 million, which aligns to the question that we went over in question 1. So those are the revenue changes that I wanted to at least make sure that the committee was aware of. The next question that I wanted to focus on is the PEG Governance Board, and you have on circle, where is this circle? Starting on circle 6, an expectation from the PEG Governance Board. And also there's a one-pager that was just produced that perhaps the co-chairs of the PEG Governance Board could pass out.
Before you do that,
Yep.
Dr. Torres, I know on page 5, you had that question regarding, so if the revenues are expected to go down by 1.9 million in 2019, what changes are being made? And the response is that there's some conversations happening, and we will find out when the executive transmits his budget. Is there anything that can be shared in terms of what are some general considerations that are taking place, what conversations are taking place right now, so that we are at least have some general idea what's going to be included during the budget transmittal, in the budget transmittal? And in addition to that, if the understanding is that because of that there's a downward trend with revenues because of the cable usage and things like that, are there any broader conversations going on about how is that going to impact whatever is being proposed and whatever may have to be realigned or reduced. Anything that can be shared.
Yeah, we are looking for new ways moving forward, given that revenues are decreasing, thinking of efficiencies that we can find under current operations, as well as considering different things that are being paid for out of this fund. So for instance, the transfers are something that we're going to have to look at very closely this year if we can't continue to transfer money out of this fund at the same rate that we have in the past. Those are decisions that the executive is currently looking into, as well as operational efficiencies for current programming.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Turgis, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for bringing us back to that point, because it is an important one. Just again to clarify, the transfers, if you wanted to see, are in Circle 15, items 109 to 115. They include an indirect cost transfer to the general fund, a telecommunications transfer to the general fund, a transfer to the general fund, Legislative Community Communications NDA, which is a council-led initiative, and a transfer to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission for the Wi-Fi in the Parks program. Those are the transfers that were referenced before.
Right, and I mean, the reality is that, for some of these, especially with the council legislative communications NDA, if the executive, makes any attempt at modifying that, it's just going to have to be put in the base budget. This is a very critical and pivotal role that, that the council has to play in terms of how we communicate with our constituents and how we, have an ability to provide information at this point in time when we know communication has changed so drastically. We're literally trying to catch up because we're pretty much very much behind. Unlike on the executive side, where you have so many PIOs, not just in his central office, he has an extraordinarily large team, but there are actually PIOs and outreach people in different departments. And so I just want to make sure that that's on the record. We try to be super creative in how we strengthen our ability to communicate. This 9-member body that has such a generous charter, where we can add and subtract to the budget and make all the land use decisions and pass all the laws. We've tried to be creative and innovative in how we fund that. So just want to make sure that that is recognized and respected. And if not, then again, it's something that we're just going to have to look at how we start including that in the base budget, because it is a pivotal and very central function to what this legislative body has to do and what our charge is. So I just wanted to say that sometimes I think there's a misconception that this is some nice to have element for the council, and every year we have to kind of try to defend this little NDA going forward. So I just want that to be very clear and on the record, because these days communication is key to everything. Everything that we do in public office really has to be backed by how we are efficiently using means of communication, with our taxpayers. So I just want to really highlight that as a very important point. Council Vice President.
Thank you, Council President. I agree there again with what you've just said. Obviously, you can't make transfers with money you don't have, and that's what we're dealing with here. I think most people are not surprised that we're getting less revenue because so many people are cutting the cord and going to other issues. I mean, it's like landlines and homes today. There's fewer and fewer that are having landlines. There was a time everybody had a phone in their house, and now everybody seems to have a phone in their pocket. So it's a change from that. But I also believe that we need to figure out when you're saying look at different programming, what does that mean? I mean, because of the print media no longer being in existence in many ways, the local print media, obviously, the Washington Post is still here, and Bethesda Beat, thank goodness, is still in business, and the Sentinel. But in most cases, the print media does not cover the issues that are dealing directly with our constituents. So we need to have a means that we can communicate as well. And and with shrinking revenues and it's like everything else in government anymore, we have more needs than we have money, and so therefore that becomes that we need to be more efficient and to figure out what people really are looking at and watching. And of course, in some cases they are looking at our meetings, and not only just the council meetings, but other agencies as well, and certainly that's one of the programs that we need to make certain we can keep. But there's other things that whether or not people are looking, and I don't know how we can survey that. I don't know, if we can come up with a programming that people would pay more, the most attention to. We should change and do what we need to do. There was a time that Montgomery County had its own news program. I mean, and obviously there was not the same market for it as it was for the regular television stations, and now regular television stations are 24/7. So so we needed to adapt with that, and we did. And I think we're going to need to do it again. But bottom line on this, I'm not surprised that our revenues are shrinking. The concern is how far will they drop, and what is going to be the base that we actually end up having.
Mm-hmm. Our technology is just very big. So we can communicate effectively.
Maybe more than one, yeah.
So this is a good segue.
Cable cut you off.
This is a good segue to the next element. If you look to page 3 of your packet, you'll see that there's a table that summarizes all the expenditures by gross category. Administration takes about $1.5 million, but then the next 5 lines, Montgomery County Government, Montgomery College, and Montgomery County Public Schools, contract to MCM, and PEGS, that totals about $9 million and a little bit more dollars. So every year, the PEG organization receives about $9 million from this cable plan through the Government Operations Committee and the full council approval. So it's a significant amount of money, and in order to make sure that this PEG network operates well and efficiently, you created a PEG governance board. And we have here the co-chairs of the governance board to give you a small report and update. And so I'll hand it over to the PEG governance board.
All right. Keating.
Good morning, Donna Keating, DTS and co-chair of the PEG governance board. We have just handed out a little bit of our story. We do understand that resources are shrinking, and we are working together so that we can be more flexible and agile to meet the needs of the county government and the various organizations that are represented. If you take a look at this just quickly, I won't go over too much of it, but we understand that the priorities are the ones that are listed. We understand that racial equity and inclusiveness is very important. We understand that the academic achievement gap is very important. So we are having conversations about how can we create programming that addresses those needs so people understand what the county has to offer as a whole and by our respective parent organizations. Dick?
Hi, Dick Lipsky, PGV Board. Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to refer to the handout that we created recently that's double-sided. This mentions some of the things that Councilperson Katz just referred to, and Madam Council President also insisted that the communications is key to everything. We're certainly aware of that, but it's important that we show that our successes, because we have to monitor those. We have to be accountable at all levels. We just can't. We used to do in the old days, in the mid '80s, we would say, well, we put something on, we didn't know who was watching, we didn't know when they were watching, or what the measurement was. Now we measure everything, and if you look at the first page, the top one, you can see the amount of posted videos, the amount of views. Live streaming events has increased dramatically over the last year or so. The tremendous number of first-run locally produced programming is over 1,500 hours, almost 700 hours of locally produced shows. These are all on the uptick. These are all reaching audiences that before were not served. We know we can always improve, but we are making a very strong effort to do that on a regular basis. So I think what it comes down to, in using Madam Council President's comment a few minutes ago about communications is key to everything, we certainly agree with that because that's what we do. But I think what really comes down to, quite frankly, with all these discussions is two simple questions. How can we help, and what value do we bring to the table? And we have to constantly ask ourselves that question because if we don't, we'll be out of business. We won't have viewers. We won't have listeners. We won't have people who get information from our channels or our web streaming or our web team that is essential for them to function. All the other things, you know, Councilman Katz referred to this earlier correctly, so obviously, they're faded away. You know, all the local papers, the Gazette, the Montgomery Journal, when I was here 35 years ago, I'd read that every day. Well, they're gone. They're not in my driveway anymore. So we have to pick up the difference, and we have to know who it is we're reaching in what languages and when we're reaching them. So I think the bottom line, what we both feel and what the entire PEG board feels is we are re-envisioning ourselves now, and we're adapting to what the needs are of the county. And is this easy? Absolutely not. It's been hard at times, but it's necessary. Otherwise, we won't be having this conversation 5 years from now. We won't be here. And if we don't do what the county needs for us to do in terms of outreach and in terms of information, then you'll find a better way to do it. I don't know what that way is, but you will find a way. So we wanted to be honest with you about where we are and looking for new ways to inform our constituencies. There are many different constituencies in Montgomery County. They're quite diverse. One of them that I want to mention that we just started a little over a year ago that has been quite successful with over 1,800 hours of programming is the Condado TV that we all share in. We added a Spanish language channel that was previously a Classic Art Showcase. And we've done quite well with that. We know we can improve on that, but we are reaching our audience there, and it is something that is valuable, and we have to continue to reinvent ourselves as we go through this process.
So I'm a little bit immersed in this conversation mostly because one of my daughters actually lives in this space professionally. And that is why I continue to be concerned about where we are. I have a sense of urgency in terms of how we need to revamp everything we're doing because we are definitely behind. And the way I think that we can do that is by tapping into the knowledge base of our young professionals in this field. And I'm talking specifically about the use of social media because, I don't have a social media expert in my office. We all kind of do it on our own, and I'm sure we're not necessarily doing it very strategically. I know I have about 5,000 followers or plus on Twitter, and it's not something that I use a lot. So when I see here that, there are 13,455 followers, I can't help but, it just stands out for me. Here we have quite a number of dollars invested in these efforts, and I really feel that we have got to take a step back and just understand that it is different, and we are, in my opinion, kind of just, doing things here and doing things there that they're kind of obvious, but we're not doing anything that is super innovative in order to try to catch up with where we are right now. The way that everybody consumes media, obviously, is that you have to have a lot of teasers, right? So you do that through Twitter, you can do that through Facebook, not a problem, but you have to have these small teasers that then people click on and then go into the much, broader story, conversation, etc. For us, basically, it's not enough to say or to think that because we have these many hours of programming that necessarily is making a difference. I'll be honest, I didn't realize we had a Spanish language channel. And so how would I feel that we're making a difference? I would feel we're making a difference if when we have a public hearing on a master plan, like the Veers Mill Corridor Master Plan, where 43%, 44% of the population in that corridor is Latino. So I would feel like we're making a difference whenever we decide, let's take the public hearing into the community, and all of a sudden we have 20, 30, 40 Latino residents show up. That doesn't happen. I mean, I literally have to spend the time of one of my staff members to literally call and educate and do that so that we can get, 6 people to testify. And so I don't have resources in my office to do that. But if we have all these resources invested, then I know we're making a difference when I see people participating, when I see folks, constantly, when we're not still talking about, hard to reach populations in the school system, when we know that this is who we are now. I mean, we're not talking anymore about small groups in the school system that are hard to reach. This is the student population. These are our clients. These are our customers. It's no longer a 5% Latino student population, for example, right? It's no longer a 10% African American or, immigrant. So I just feel like there's still a disconnect between who we are, what our needs are, and what we're doing. And I appreciate some of the work that has happened, but we were kind of here when I just got to the council where we had a major revamp, and where we said we need to start seeing some major shift or else we're not going to be able to fund it anymore. Now we're just being, I think, pushed because the funding is definitely now beginning to diminish. It wasn't even us saying that it's being diminished. So I just want to say, I mean, again, I appreciate everything that is here, but I don't think we are riding the wave the way we should. And there is a lot of need for communication out there. So I would like to see some major, recommendations, innovative, ideas coming through, tapping in our, young people who live in this space, who are experts in this space. I mean, social media branding, social media specialists, now it's a thing. I mean, it's a profession. So do you guys have social media professionals in your different capacities? How are you using that? What is the content that you're now pushing? And then what are the metrics, right? So that we know that these $9 million that we're investing, I like to see how we're reaching the population we say we need to reach. And then on the other end, I want to see those folks participating in whatever it is that county government is offering, right? And I see Ms. Pace here that, probably has a different perspective because you live with all of these young people, right? So and you see it in your niche area.
Thank you. I'm Melissa Pace, Montgomery College Television. You are correct. We are trying to adapt at the college in this space. So in the perspective of Montgomery College, Dr. Pollard's mission, radical inclusivity, racial equity, social justice, innovation, closing the achievement gap, closing the opportunity gap. So that's basically what I think about all the time. And what we did recently in this space with social media is to take a topical promotion approach and used some lapsed funds from last year to have our first ever paid marketing campaign with the intention of having the call to action ultimately be register at Montgomery College. So is MCTV programming helping? We wanted to measure our message and what and what response we were getting from that. So we did exactly what you said with the teasers. We call them topical promos. And so we looked at specific areas, the food insecure group, single parents, immigrant populations, Spanish speakers. We also did some fun, Raptor reports, which are sports oriented, and radio TV show that the students put on called The Box. So we took little 15-second teasers for what ended up being a total of 52 different messages over the course of a 6-week period. And the call to action was to push people to come to the MCTV webpage or watch the videos on YouTube. And ultimately, from the MCTV webpage, go to the Apply Now button. So there's different buttons, different pages. And if you would have asked me how many people are going to apply after seeing this, I may have had a very conservative estimate, But I was very pleased to find out, and we still have one more week of reporting to go, but through a sophisticated digital media agency that the college works with, we were able to track post impressions. And just to simplify this, if you saw an ad but you didn't react to it, but later you went to the website, it can measure that. And we had, of our 6-week campaign, 388 people actually clicked on the Apply Now button from watching a show about, are you hungry? How can you, dating as a single parent, how to raise boys. Things like immigrant students talking to each other and talking about what their experience is like at Montgomery College. Generación Latina, show for young Spanish-speaking population. So we know that from in the period of time through this agency, they clicked back and saw that it might take 20 visits to the MCTV to the MC website before they get to the Apply Now.
Right.
But for these 388 people during this 6-week period, one of those visits was involved with our videos that pushed them forward to ultimately make the decision to apply. So that's kind of how we're measuring our report card of success. Is this working? Are we speaking to the right populations?
That's really great, and I appreciate you coming to the table and telling us that, because I think that is exactly right. What we need to do is tap into those professionals who are in the cusp and in the avant-garde, if you will, realm of how to then utilize all these social media outlets to get to where we want to go. And I feel like in government we haven't necessarily made that leap and understood that that's where we need to go. We're still sort of trying to use the same old ways of doing things while everybody has already moved and and left us behind. I really do appreciate you sharing that, Council Vice President.
Thank you.
Thank you. But of the 388, do you know how many were different people?
No, I do not. I'd have to ask our social media team about that.
Because you could be attracting 200 people that have,
That's true.
looked at multiple issues, and with the student population of whatever is at Montgomery College today, is 388 a significant number? I mean, what would have been the number that should have, that you were really are attempting to reach? And that's the same thing for Dick Lipsky. Even when you were talking about the various for the tweets and everything else, the question is, what are the numbers that they should be? I mean, 13,000 is a nice number, but if it should be 130,000, 13,000 is not. I mean, not to any way knock what's being done, but we need to really figure out where we should be on that. So that's, to me, is a significant point.
And the 13,000 followers, that's not just MCPS, that's the PEG network, is that right? Yeah, right. So again, that's what just jumps out at me. And again, I'm not trying to say that I'm like the biggest expert on any of this stuff, but I do know that obviously there is an absolute different standard in terms of how people receive information, react to information, and it is instant, and it's right away. So I guess my message is that now we're facing this decline, obviously, in revenues. We need to utilize the dollars that we do have in the most cutting edge, impact-driven, effective fashion. And if we're not living in the social media space, and that goes to Spanish speakers as well, they live in the social media space. If that's not how we're pushing out content, we're not really utilizing those dollars the way that we should. So I would just offer that as a really critical point that I know I'm going to be looking at very carefully as we go through the budget cycle. Yes, Ms. Pace.
If I can just answer Mr. Katz's point, the 388 is about 100 more than the entire senior population of Damascus High School or Seneca Valley High School. So their senior classes are in the.
Say that again?
The number of 12th graders graduating seniors at those two high schools are less than 300. So it's just a comparison.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know that that's an answer for that one. I mean, we can go to any school and say that there's many other schools and you didn't reach them. So, I guess what I'm saying on that one, candidly, is that I don't know, we should be appreciative of how many we reached, but I don't know that we should be applauding that we reached enough, to say the extreme least.
Yeah, to compare to the marketing campaigns that were taking place at the college before the MCTV element, these numbers were higher. So we feel like, although I can't directly answer without some more expertise here assisting me, we do feel like it was a very positive addition to the college's regular marketing efforts during that time. I'm sorry.
And I had a point, just to get back to your original point, to give us a better baseline. So we have 2 full-time social media people at the Public Information Office for the county, for the school system. So we have 111,000 Twitter followers. So that's really our baseline. That's really where we need to be. That's just the school system. Now, I know we have different information, but both of this is impactful. In my mind, that's closer to the real number that I think you're referring to.
Yeah.
But we have 2 full-time people doing this all the time and measuring it every month and seeing what our performance is every month. We're evaluating it.
I do, yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. And again, it is very interesting because I think in the past it would never occur to us to have social media, experts as part of the communications team. But now that is just the norm. And so whether you have, content specialists that feed it in, to the social media specialist, that is the combination that we have to invest in. For sure. I mean, that's where we're going to get our bang for our buck. There is no doubt. Ms. Keating, yes.
Could I translate this into perhaps what the PEG network might want to do in anticipation of the full budget discussion? And that is to make sure that in their submission of requirements, they include both content expectations as well as metrics that they will use. If that were the case, that could then simplify your task to know here's what they want to push out and here's the metrics they're going to go by. Is it 17,000 or 170,000?
Well,
and of course, it'll take some time.
But for me also, what is the mechanism through which that's going to be done, which goes to the issue of staffing, right? What kind of expertise or capacity do you have that is capable, and able to push this content to reach that metric, right? So that I think that's. I'll go to Ms. Keating and then Ms. Thompson.
Just quickly, we do have 2 social media experts on our team as well, and we work very closely with Sonia and her team. As an example, when you all held your youth town hall meeting, we were on Snapchat with the geo filter. We carried the event last week live on Facebook. There are 3 events that we're going to be working together in the next couple of weeks that will be live on Facebook. So we understand the challenge, and we are getting our resources, lining up our resources to be able to handle that better.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. Annette Hobbs.
Nanette Hobson, Montgomery Community Media. I just wanted to speak to 2 points. One, we too have a social media content manager who is responsible for pushing content out. It's because, as you point out, if the the news comes to you now, you don't go to the news. Our websites are really just mainframes for the content, but you decide what you want to reach out and grab. But I wanted to speak to Councilman Katz's point about the lack of local news, which is another void that Montgomery Community Media is trying to assume that with hyper-local election coverage, everyday news coverage, covering the issues that are important to residents of Montgomery County very specifically. I know that the county used to have a newscast, and we're trying to make sure that those kinds of stories are available to the citizens of Montgomery County on a daily basis. It is a resource-heavy, mission, and I think that part of the issue of what we're discussing here is not only what we're doing, but making sure people are aware of what we're doing. So there's a marketing component here that I think the PEGS as an organization is also trying to tackle in our discussions, and how to wisely spend the funds that we get, and to work together to make sure that the content, all that stuff that we do, is available to people and that they know about it, because that's a big part of the issue. You can send out a tweet, but if you don't have the followers, or you only have so many followers, it isn't going to reach everyone. And making something go viral is not an easy formula. Some of our most popular stories have been not necessarily the most important ones, but you know, you need to be making sure that you are covering the news of the day and what's interesting to people in order to make them aware.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that the PEG has done a lot of really constructive work and productive work around sharing content. You know, this was an issue, I know, years back, this idea of collaborating so that, and I guess, you know, mainstream media is doing that as well. I mean, they're not able to have, you know, people out there in the field all the time, so there's a lot of content sharing. I think that's been really important. I do need to shout out Sonia Healy, because she's done an amazing job here in the council with very small, you know, level of resources, but we're in that conversation as well about how do we begin to migrate into, you know, social media and be much more intentional and innovative, because the bottom line is that, yes, I mean, in the past it was the Gazette and all these different newspapers, but today that's where it is about, you know, this issue of social media presence and getting ahead of, you know, the activity, because I think that it is wonderful to be able to broadcast or, you know, live stream a particular event or activity. I want us to get to the point where people show up at the activity because we've done all this, you know, initial advertising and just, you know, blasting out, et cetera, and so a lot of people know. That I know it's a tall order, but I think we can get there if we continue to use all of your expertise and experience, and then bring in again some of these, you know, younger social media savvy professionals that are out there doing this every day. So great. So we will.
So just one last quick thing. So clearly the revenue decline is evident. I sent an updated revenue projection from OMB Finance Department that shows that perhaps the decline is less steep than they thought for the second quarter, but decline it is. We cannot expect the same revenue. So I raised the question of strategically what are going to be the challenges. We've just talked about how important and how resource heavy it is to emphasize certain things. So a strategic approach to the cable plan will be obviously very necessary. The last thing that I wanted to at least make the committee aware of is on page 2, item 4 in the recommendations is the renegotiation effort with Verizon and Comcast. Those franchises expire in 2021, so that's all just around the corner, and we still have no cable administrator. It's ably filled right now on an acting basis by our new broadband officer, but that's not his full-time occupation. So I just wanted to raise the alarm flag a little bit to say we need a cable administrator on premises and beginning to understand the complexities of the franchise negotiation process.
Great.
Yes, this committee agrees, and this council has also done everything possible, and as president I've also facilitated, you know, our schedules to be very nimble and respond very quickly to the executives nominees, and in terms of, you know, we understand that it's going to be really important for him to have his full complement ASAP, so we're doing our best, including adding some council sessions in order to confirm these appointments. But you're absolutely right. I mean, that's going to be really important. This is not a very simple issue, so we look forward to that, you know, happening soon. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody taking the time.